Hi, my name is Ross Kane, and I will be presenting on the Devonian extinction. So, to start out, there were five major mass extinctions in Earth's history. The Devonian was the third largest of them all. Of the five, they were the terminal Ordovician, the terminal Permian, terminal Triassic, and then the terminal Cretaceous, and finally the late Devonian. And the Devonian was occurred possibly over 20 to 25 million years. But the thing is, for the Devonian mass extinction, it didn't just carry out in one single event. It is thought that it was a series of extinctions over several million years. And many things took a hit, like life in the shallow seas, and also reefs as well took a hammering, and they would not really make a comeback to the earth until over 100 years later when coral evolved in the seas. But what was the causes of the Devonian extinction and killing all of about 80% of Earth's life? It was thought to be the so-called asphyxiation of the ocean, where the seabed became devoid of oxygen, and the only thing left was bacteria. While also changes in sea level, asteroid impacts, climate change, and new kinds of plants messing with the soil have also been blamed for the extinctions. But overall, this happened 359 years ago, so we don't have too much knowledge. We're only left to make educated assumptions of this. But to talk more about how the sea was asphyxiated, Earth's levels of oxygen decreased like tenfold. There was a lot of CO2 levels that increased, and things were just dying because global anoxia, which means worldwide a worldwide oxygen shortage, was happening. Thus, terrestrial plants suffered a major decline, and I believe that there is a possibility that the decline of plants might have also helped lead to the Devonian mass extinction because plants undergo photosynthesis, even though during that time period we're not too certain if they really did. Some supporting evidence would be the blue-green algae from stromatolites, which we learned about in Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything, that the blue-green algae created oxygen, and that could aid to the idea that plants did achieve photosynthesis during the Devonian mass extinction. However, these plants are being killed off due to soil being messed with from the massive global anoxia. But the Devonian period was also known as the Age of Fish. The marine life was thriving. Most of Earth's life was actually marine life, and not too many land forms were present on Earth at the time. And Thomas Algeo, a geologist, claimed that Devonian sea life may have been killed off by these marauding plants that had messed up soil. And what would happen was the plants were encroaching on the ocean and killing off these reefs. And, the reefs were essential for this marine life to thrive. So a lot of shallow sea animals had died and become extinct because they could not live in the ocean asphyxiation and needed oxygen to survive. And also the reef devastation really aided to that. But also Thomas Algeo brought up how taxa and deep water creatures had thrived before the Devonian mass extinction and also after the extinction, but they were also located more deep water under the ocean, which the shallow ones were not. One of the aiding mass extinction impacts were the possible asteroid impact that occurred. It is not proven that there was a possible impact by an asteroid. However, there is a crater found in Australia that might lead to this that's about 10 meters wide in diameter and length. Although it is not proven, we're up to speculation, honestly. Devonian marine deposits are also notable in part for the widespread occurrence of black shales in the shallow inland seas of North America and Eurasia. And they were organic-rich sediments which indicate anoxic, which is oxygen-deprived, bottom waters that occurred about the same time as the multiple extinction events during the Middle and the Late Devonian period. Thomas Algeo brought up how these deposits were the results of organic matter and nutrient imports from increasingly vegetated landscapes, which, in addition to causing widespread eutrophication in shallow seas, terrestrial plants contributed to accelerated pedogenesis, which is soil formation, which in turn resulted in accelerated weathering. And what this process does is it creates calcium and magnesium and carbonates and removes CO2 from the atmosphere. And the carbonates entered the river and were exported to the oceans, where they precipitated and became buried in marine sediments. And in the marine burial of massive quantities of carbon and inorganic carbonates, they experienced the reduced atmospheric CO2 levels, and the loss of the greenhouse gas is what was believed to result in global cooling, which was the major climate change that happened during the Devonian period, and gradually these climates led to cooler temperatures to which some animals could not habit and led to them becoming extinct. But the ironic thing is the development and maturation of terrestrial environments was by the expansion of terrestrial plants, which wreaked havoc from the oceans from which life first arose. Also, Algeo brings up how the Devonian period can be punctuated by about 8 to 10 extinction events, and these are known as the Kellwasser event, the Hangeberg event, and also a variety of other events which they do not really have a solid name for. Also, I checked out a oxygen to CO2 chart, and basically there was a carbon correlation between some of the oceans and the shallow and deep sea oceans, and the carbon level raised gradually when the climate change occurred where the earth was cooling. But anyway, with talking aside from the carbon isotopes, the Devonian period also saw rise to vascular land plants, which is a group that includes everything from trees to ferns and to flowering plants. Also, there were more primitive plants such as moss and lichen that had already evolved before the Devonian period began. But the vascular plants had a very powerful impact on the land. Their roots had penetrated the ground, and they broke up rocks, which in turn created soil, and by breaking down the rocks, the plants released nutrients and minerals. So these would have benefited the plants, but they got washed into rivers and then out into oceans. And that's when things started to go wrong for life in the seas, because these nutrients were food for microscopic algae, and the algae began to multiply. And the result was a lot of algae that stained a lot of areas of the sea. And when the algae was broken down by bacteria, it used a lot of oxygen up in the process. So that ultimately led to the so-called asphyxiation of the ocean, also known as an anoxic zone, where a region of the ocean just did not have enough oxygen dissolved in the water for animals to breathe, which in turn led to them becoming extinct. And it also happens today, which no one really ever clarifies, but An example would be from when nutrients from farms run into the sea, which result in dead zones, which can span many square miles, kilometers. But the dead zones spread over thousands of years, which ultimately resulted in these gradual extinctions, just like what Thomas Algeo said about the 8 to 10 extinctions and how it wasn't just one event. Thank you for listening to my presentation.